Hello, my name is Peter Flower and I recently completed a professional experience practicum as part of EUN231 Informing Professional Practice at QUT. My tutor was Elizabeth Bryant and I was in the asynchronous learning group. The school I completed my professional experience at was a co-ed public state high school in a South Brisbane suburb. The school was quite large and had over 1,400 students currently enrolled. The specific class I targeted for this learning intervention was a Year 8 English class, where students were aged between 12 and 13 years old. The diagnostic assessment, teaching and learning activities, and formative assessment took place over 4 lessons. In discussion with my supervising teacher, we did some backwards mapping from the assessment tasks that would be given to the students towards the end of the unit. The assessment task was focused on students being able to deconstruct and analyse a poem written by an Indigenous Australian, where they had to identify 3 poetic devices in the poem and explain how the device adds meaning. As such, the key learning intention that I developed was that students need to be able to deconstruct and analyse a poem, and more specifically, they will need to be able to identify a range of poetic devices and understand how the author uses these devices to convey meaning. This also closely aligned with the ACARA content descriptor: identify and evaluate devices that create tone, for example, humour, wordplay, innuendo, and parody, in poetry, humorous prose, a drama, or visual text, under the literature responding to literature content stream. So I needed to ask myself, how will I improve the students' ability to identify different poetic devices and understand they have been used to add meaning to the poem? I used a variety of core strategies to assess student knowledge and learning. At the beginning of the teaching of the subject matter for the unit, I performed a diagnostic assessment to gauge where the students were currently at with their knowledge and understanding of poetic devices. This was done in the form of a multiple choice quiz where I posed 5 questions to students and had them record their responses on a blank piece of paper. The students then marked their own work and I collected them so that I was able to record their responses and provide feedback to the students. Throughout the teaching of the unit, I used gallery walks at the end of each lesson where students were allowed to move around the room and see how their peers were completing tasks and then compare this to their own. And it also gave me the chance to move around the room as well and spend time communicating with each student and see how they were going with the content. While teaching, I also utilised no hands up questioning, where essentially I would choose students at random to respond to questions I asked the class. This allowed me to see which students were on task and understanding what was being taught. At the end of the 4th lesson, I performed a formative assessment task in the form of a quiz where students were given 5 example passages from a poem and they had to correctly identify the poetic device that was being used. In order to track evidence of student learning throughout the 4 lessons, I kept an Excel spreadsheet where I recorded how these students were performing at the end of each lesson. This was usually done during the gallery walk at the end of the lesson where I would be able to move around and check each student's work. And if it was a lesson when we did not do a gallery walk, I would have each student bring their work to me at the end of the lesson to be checked before they were allowed to leave. Students would be awarded 1 of 3 marks: an N for needs attention, an M for meeting expectations, and an E for exceeding expectations. You can see here that the first initial diagnostic assessment I conducted with the class, it was a rather simple and quick multiple choice quiz consisting of 5 questions, and the students in the class had previously learned a little bit about these poetic devices when they were in Year 7. As the students did have some previous knowledge about the subject, I decided that students who received 3 or less correct answers would need attention, 4 correct answers would be meeting expectations, and all 5 correct answers would be exceeding expectations. So here we have the 3 students who were deemed to be needing attention after the diagnostic assessment, and this group became the basis for the learning intervention that I put in place to ensure these students were able to meet the learning intention and complete their assessment. After I collected the responses from the students and recorded their marks, I also provided some written feedback. I used this feedback to highlight to the students what they need to remember when identifying poetic devices and provided praise for what had been done correctly. Students were also provided with the quiz questions so they could successfully compare the feedback provided with their responses. The first teaching strategy I used was that of gradual release and responsibility and explicit instruction, which was essentially I do, we do, you do. On the right here, you can see an annotated copy of a poem that was done as part of the we do phase in one of our lessons, where I worked with students to complete the annotations. After this, students were required to annotate their own chosen poems as part of the You Do phase. And at the end of the lesson, we did a gallery walk again, which allowed me to see that the students who needed attention were engaged in the task and provide feedback as necessary. So we also did a collaborative learning activity. So this was targeted at the group of students in the needs attention category specifically. It was a Think, Pair, Share activity. And students in this group were allowed to work in a pair with a friend to annotate their chosen poem for their assessment. Students would then share their annotations with the other pairing, and this allowed me to work closely with these students while the rest of the class worked independently to complete their annotations. So in regards to the teaching and assessment strategies that I use these because specifically for backwards mapping and design. Backwards mapping focuses on teaching for the desired learning result rather than focusing on teaching from textbooks or favoured lesson plans and time-honoured activities. So this helps students to understand what they will be learning and why, and avoids confusing and frustrating students with unnecessary activities. GRR and explicit instruction, it models appropriate behaviour and standards for students to achieve. It clearly communicates to students what they are being asked to do and what is expected of them, and it encourages students to become more confident in their ability to complete a task. The collaborative learning provides a safe environment where students can see how their peers are responding to tasks. And as the students engage and work together, they serve as a source of support and motivation and learning for one another. The gallery walks are used as a form of formative assessment. And as students examine each other's work, they think about their own concepts and ideas and how this compares with their own work. And students use the feedback provided by their peers and the teacher to consider how they can improve their work. The questioning and random selection allows me to monitor who is understanding the content and staying on task, and it encourages other students in the class to be engaged with the teaching and learning as they may be called upon to answer the next question. So for the formative assessment, I did another quiz. However, this time it was not multiple choice, and students needed to identify the poetic device just by reading this short passage from a poem that was presented to them. This was done to make the task more challenging, and as such, the grading system was now, if the student scored 1 to 2, they needed attention, 3 was meeting expectations, and 4 or 5 were exceeding expectations. So you can see here that all of the students improved from their results from the initial diagnostic assessment, which was good to see, as this indicated that the learning intervention had been successful. So if we go back to our data tracking, we can see that students 4 and 17 improved throughout the learning intervention to exceed expectations. Student 11 improved to meeting expectations, and the entire class either improved their level or stayed at the same level, which was really good to see. Except for one student who was, throughout the intervention, he was continually exceeding expectations, and just on the day of the formative assessment, he performed below them. And I spoke with him afterwards, and he did have a bit going on that day, and he just wasn't quite focused on the task. But moving forward in the rest of the lessons, he was back on track and performed well. So strategies for my future professional experience. I would like to do a more comprehensive and challenging diagnostic and formative assessment. I would like to complete the intervention over a longer period of time and on a larger topic in the unit. I would also like to try new teaching and assessment strategies to further develop a range of useful techniques to assess teaching and learning. Thank you for listening to me today.